Thank you very much. We're back at the luncheon, and I want to say good afternoon to everybody and welcome to the luncheon for the 13th ITA-IEL-ICC Joint Conference on International Energy Arbitration here in Houston. I would like to thank for each of you for being here in the room, and also to many of you for making the trip to Houston to be here with us. I am Krina Baltag. I am Associate Professor in International Arbitration Law at Stockholm University, and I have the honor of serving as the Chair of the Academic Council of the Institute for Transnational Arbitration. I would like to acknowledge the Chair of the ITA, Professor Chip Brower, and the ITA staff led by TL Kabic and Dr. Daria Shirakova for helping to bring this luncheon interview to fruition. I would like to thank the ITA's partners in organizing today's conference, the Institute for Energy Law, and the ICC International Court of Arbitration. The ITA Academic Council's interview project, Preserving Perspectives, International Arbitrators in Their Own Words, is important and wholly unique among projects hosted by various international organizations around the world. That is because we interview prominent international arbitrators and arbitration practitioners and record the stories of their lives and careers as they themselves tell it. The videos of these interviews are memorialized on the ITA's website for future generations of arbitration practitioners to learn from them. I am pleased to introduce today's interview of Claudia Salomon, the President of ICC International Court of Arbitration, who will be interviewed by Mcilwrath, MD Disputes. And Claudia will be duly introduced by Michael, so I'll not do that, although she doesn't need introduction. But I'd like to say a few words about Mike, as we call Michael. Mike is a global leader in dispute resolution. Most of you know Mike for spending more than 20 years as in-house counsel, leading the dispute resolution teams at Baker Hughes, before that at GE Oil and Gas, and of course now has moved to private practice as founder as M Disputes. What is more important, Mike was for many years the chair of ICC's governing body for dispute resolution services. And in that capacity, Mike led the selection process, which led to the election of Claudia as the president of the ICC Court. So I'm not sure if this is going to be an interview or a performance review. We'll see. But we are tremendously grateful to Claudia for having agreed to be interviewed as part of this project, and to Mike for agreeing to serve as her interviewer. Of course, we all look very much forward to the discussion. Now, without further ado, the Academic Council of the Institute for Transnational Arbitration is very pleased to present the Preserving Perspectives project interview of Claudia Salomon, interviewed by Michael Mcilwrath.
Thank you. Oh yeah, tag. Great. Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for having me to conduct this interview. As Krina mentioned, I had the honor of being the chair of the selection committee that led to Claudia's appointment as the president of the ICC Court. And I was also the chair for the governing body of the ICC's dispute resolution services during her first 3-year term and part of a little bit of her second. I thought that I would start this introduction rather than, many of you know Claudia and know her background, but I would like to share with you a couple of factoids from our early interactions when I got to know Claudia, which I think are illustrative of her qualities of leadership and her character and how she is as an arbitrator, as well as a leader in the dispute resolution community. And they're just two quick, short stories that are about people and process. The first one is about people. I remember very well during the selection process that we had a number of interviews with phenomenal candidates around the world, very, very qualified people, as you can imagine, who applied for the position of president of the ICC Court. And I remember the moment when I realized this is the right person for the job. And it was during the final round of interviews that we had. Claudia spoke for quite a bit about her plans, her vision for the future of the ICC, how she planned to develop the ICC further. It was rather analytical. It wasn't boring, it was analytical. It was highly prepared and well calibrated to the group that was doing the review. But then there was a question about her teams, the teams that she led at Latham & Watkins as the co-chair of Latham's global arbitration practice. And she changed in that moment. And you could just see just the spark that came out of Claudia when she talked about her team, the pride that she had in seeing others succeed. So that was the mindset, that this is the person that we want. That, in my mind, anyway, that was that moment where I shifted. The other short story or factoid to tell you about Claudia was she took office, as many of you know, in July of 2021 as the president. And when she became president of the ICC Court that time, she followed, as you know, a very high-profile predecessor who had done a number of innovative things, who had introduced some even somewhat radical changes in the ICC rules. And ICC was doing quite well. The caseload was booming. And she comes in, during the COVID pandemic, inheriting lots of these issues, these problems that she's encountering. And she's also the first woman president of the ICC Court in 100-year history, and I think also the first American. So you could imagine someone in that position being somewhat forgiven if what their main goal is just stay the course, keep the ship afloat, let's get through this crisis period. What Claudia does on her first week in office is she sits down and has a lunch with A.J. Bonga, the president of the larger ICC, the Chamber of Commerce. A.J. at that time was the CEO of MasterCard. Today he's the president of the World Bank. And Claudia puts to him a plan for substantial investment in restructuring the organization that provides ICC's dispute resolution services. And AJ said, go do it. She then spends the next so many years after that, and still today, executing on that plan and that vision. So I thought it was the planning that went into that, the thought that she went before she came to that position. I think that and her focus on people are two of the themes that I hope that will come out of this interview. So without further ado, as Grina said, let me just, let's hear from Claudia, what it is that shaped her into a person who makes those sorts of moves, who's comfortable being bold and decisive in what she does in international arbitration. So, but let's start with your background. Claudia, is it true that as a child you once wrote a long letter to your parents explaining why they had unjustly grounded you?
It's true.
Yeah?
Very true.
How long were you grounded?
It was one of those situations where I must have come home later than my parents thought I was supposed to come home, and I didn't realize that was their expectations. So I had to stand up for myself, and so if there was any doubt that I was going to be a lawyer, that was solidified.
How old were you?
Young.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. My father had gotten a job at Randolph-Macon College when I was a year. Okay, good. So my family moved to Richmond, Virginia when I was a year, and so I grew up there.
What kind of place was it?
Well, my parents were New Yorkers. My mother was born in Brooklyn. My father was born in the Bronx. And in 1970, Richmond, Virginia was going through very serious racial tensions. There was real questions whether the public schools would open that fall for my older sisters because of desegregation. We lived in an area in Richmond where my family was the only Jewish family. And so in many respects, it was like being an immigrant, a Yankee family with parents who were not necessarily used to adopting, and the neighbors were not necessarily used to having people like our family in their neighborhood. So it was a lot like being immigrants in a foreign land.
And you don't have a Southern accent.
My parents would not allow me to have a Southern accent. I mean, if I have a little bit more to drink, then, you might hear it. But I actually got in trouble if I said yes, ma'am, to my mother. She, as a New Yorker, thought it sounded uneducated. And so if I said pa or sky, I got in trouble. So that is why I don't have a heavy Southern accent.
And so you grow up in Richmond, Virginia, and then you go off to Brandeis for college. And then you spent a year at Oxford before you graduated. And then we're going quickly through her academic background, but you're then wind up at Harvard Law School. Along this way, were you interested in international law at all?
No, I didn't take a single international law class in law school. I didn't even get exposed to international arbitration until later in my career. So I was actually really focused on voting and election law. At the year I spent at Oxford, I had the honor of studying with David Butler, who was the foremost election law commentator and expert in the UK. And then in law school, as a first-year associate or first-year student, I studied with a professor who was a visiting professor teaching a specialized course, and that was really only offered to second and third-year students, but I was given special permission to take that as my first-year elective.
And you studied voting rights?
Voting and election issues.
Right. So I mean, if I were to look at it, sort of a common theme there's a sense of justice. Well, you're in law school, so of course justice, but but a sense of the public good.
I was very interested in the intersection of law and politics. I mean, the first sentence of my law school essay was, "I love politics." And interested in the way systems worked in political participation. And actually, I even taught a course at University of Richmond when I was a junior associate and working in Richmond on voting. And so in some respects, one could say there's a continuum of the intersection of governments and law. Just I went from being interested in, cities and towns to then sovereign states. So I was always, I went from representing, when I was a lawyer, representing the town of Colonial Beach in Virginia and the city of Phoenix in Arizona to, many countries that I had the honor of representing: Georgia, the Czech Republic, Thailand, others.
And at Harvard, you still didn't have this international arbitration. You didn't take any courses on international arbitration?
Nothing.
Any particular professors who stood out or mentors to you or influential?
Well, I did have the opportunity to take an advanced constitutional law course with Larry Tribe. And so I had my first year constitutional law course with Kathleen Sullivan, who then went on to become the dean of Stanford and then part of Quinn. And she was phenomenal, but then an advanced course, and it was advanced constitutional law on the edge of life and death. 30 years ago, you don't even need to articulate what were some of the issues then, whether that's how you're defining life in the early stages of life and at the end, in the legal questions and all the technological elements that were intersecting with legal questions at that point. And so it was a seminar, and then at the end of the course, we needed to write a paper. And so I made a proposal to Professor Tribe of 3 topics, and 2 were very, very technical. And one was to write about the decision-making process that my family had gone through when my mother had died, and she died the week before I went to law school. And so law school for me was a very different experience than for many students. While people were talking about hypotheticals, I had just experienced something very significant. And so I really am so appreciative that Professor Tribe immediately responded that I should write on the personal side, because it allowed me to bookend my law school experience and not bring it to a close, but bring bring the thinking and the emotion into my analytical thinking that I had developed over those 3 years.
But do you think that maybe at this time you could say your interests, at least this is what I would get, were looking at practical solutions, using the law as a tool to find practical solutions to real life problems?
I think that's, when you talk about political participation, you certainly have that. And then, when I was interested in, and I went back to Richmond, Virginia to practice law in the beginning of my career, and I joined the local government group. And so that really was how does law engage with people, and how are governments structured, and what are the legal issues in disputes, not just between people and the governments, but in disputes between governments. Water rights involve disputes between governments.
And that was your first job out of law school. You moved back to Richmond, and you go to work for a law firm there in the government group?
Yes, I went back to Richmond, Virginia. I was a summer associate at Debevoise in Plimpton when I was a second-year law student in New York, but for family reasons, then I went and started my legal career at Mason Valentine, which is, emerged now into a very different law firm. And there was a local government group, and so the primary clients were local governments.
And just looking back, how do you think that may have influenced what you later became in international arbitration, that experience?
Well, I did have the opportunity when I was a very, very junior associate to participate in two jury trials in Lynchburg, Virginia. And I remember one of the lead partners, Tony Troy, he was a former attorney general, and he would talk with the doorman at the hotel, the security people at the courthouse, and it was those engagements that shaped his argument in front of the jury. This was before or in the infancy of kind of jury. We weren't doing mock jury trials in that context, but he was talking to the people who lived in that community, and then shaping how he was then communicating and making effective arguments in front of the jury. And I really do think that has influenced the way I communicate, but also recognizing that you have to really understand the community you're in when you're practicing law or when you're trying to do business.
So at this time in your career, you're 4 years here at this firm in Richmond, and you're a committed litigator. You're a courtroom litigator, and you apply then for a job in Phoenix with Squire Sanders, and as a litigator.
Yeah.
Again, we're not in any background with it. We're not doing arbitration at this stage. And I spoke with one of the lawyers, actually the head of the office, Mark Nadeau, who does international arbitration. He told me that you actually came into the firm as a litigator, and then one day there, this is in Phoenix, he walks into your office and says, would you be willing to take a flight tomorrow to Prague, to Czech Republic, and possibly not come back for a few months? And he says, the next day you were on the flight. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So my husband went to graduate school at ASU, and so I went to Phoenix, Arizona, and I have to say it was never in my life plan to practice in Arizona. He was the only person I knew in Phoenix, Arizona. I must say I went to a library to look up the names of recruiters. We did research very differently in 1998 and found somebody who could help me identify who I should even interview with as a mid-level associate in Phoenix, Arizona. And so I did interview with some very prominent Arizona law firms and could have continued with more of a government or political focus. But I also kind of had come to this realization that in the political world, it was often about who you knew rather than what you knew. And so while I wasn't inclined initially in my career to be focused on business issues, I found that as I did more business-related work, I was going to actually be assessed much more on what I knew rather than who I knew. And at that point in 1998, there were just a few law firms in Arizona that were part of a national practice. And so I also interviewed with those, and so Squire Sanders was one of them. And Mark Nadeau was the head of litigation at the time, and in our interview, he is the one who told me in 1998 that international arbitration was the wave of the future. And it was a lot like the movie The Graduate, you know, plastics. And so it was international arbitration. And I had never...
Except Benjamin doesn't go into plastics.
Yeah, but for me, that all made sense, even though I had never heard of international arbitration. Because from that point, and Mark was quite prescient, you know, as there was going to be more cross-border trade, international arbitration was going to be the preferred dispute resolution mechanism, and there was an opportunity to get involved from the ground up. So while I continued as a litigator and did represent the city of Phoenix and did commercial litigation there, I began to get involved in arbitration. I mean, we wrote the brochure for Squire Sanders on international arbitration. You know, we started talking to transactional lawyers about drafting dispute resolution clauses, and I had a little bit of experience doing some cases because the partners at Squire Sanders in Phoenix had really a national practice. They were not just doing work in Arizona. So we were representing EchoStar in Colorado and a lot of other companies from other parts of the world. And so that was really my entree, so that then when the firm got hired by the Czech Republic in 2001, in the Saluka versus Czech Republic case, it was one of the largest, if not the largest, investment treaty cases at the time. It was an opportunity for me. And my husband and I, we had, you know, just bought a house. We had just bought an SUV, but it was a real opportunity, and I wanted to seize that.
Yeah, Mark told me it was actually a big opportunity for the firm, because I don't know that the firm had the case yet. You were sent, and what Mark told me was that he said, you can wait 2 weeks, but there are going to be experts and people from other firms all arriving. If you get there first, if you're on that plane tomorrow, he said tomorrow, you'll be the first to arrive, and you'll be the leader on the case, and that you became that leader.
Yeah.
Why do you think, Mark, and that was a big risk? I mean, I think it was a big risk for him to take, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what an investment treaty was, so certainly one could say that's a risk. Yeah. But while I was in Arizona, and I think in the early stages of my career, I would get described as a fire jumper, and I know that has some significance right now, as so many of you or colleagues or family may be impacted by the fires in Los Angeles. But you know, we think of a fire jumper as somebody who is being lowered down while the flames are shooting to turn the nozzle and stop everything from being a disaster. And at that stage of my career, I was really willing to do whatever it took to help the client and help the team. And as younger lawyers are thinking about work-life balance, that is not necessarily what they want to do at all times, but at that stage, I was really willing to do that, and somebody who was really willing to be part of the team and could think. And so I think Mark did take a leap, that I would be somebody who would be willing to do what was required in what would be a very complicated matter, politically sensitive, representing the government in cutting-edge issues.
You know, I think that probably most people in this room would agree that most of what we learn, the important lessons that we learn in international arbitration, this is why we have an oral history here. They're things that we learn from others rather than from books. I mean, what did you learn from Mark or others in the team in those early stages? What were some key lessons that you could say?
So the most significant lesson, I would say, was a day when another associate emailed the strategy to opposing counsel instead of local counsel.
Don't do that. The younger ones in the room. Yeah.
So the lesson, though, isn't just don't do that. I remember him snapping into action and then going down the elevator with him a few hours later and saying to him, you didn't explode and get angry at this associate. You just snapped into action to take care of the things that needed to happen. And he said to me, you are only the product of your experiences. And that has really shaped me, because oftentimes, when you're drafting a brief and you get a draft that is not what you would hope it would be, or you're up at crazy hours at night to try to finish something, or there's a problem, you could spend a lot of energy frustrated with the problem, and of course you'll have a postmortem and think about how to do it better next time. But at that moment, if you're in a leadership position, your only job is to fix it. And that may be very much while you're in that position. And so that has really been my approach since then.
That's great.
Another key thing he taught me was that every single person on the team was essential to the team, and that was really the secretaries and all of the assistants. He understood that if the secretary had a good relationship with the client, we got paid quicker. Because they were talking about the billing issues, secretary to secretary, and could get so much done. And so there was always this sense of every single person being essential to the team.
So one of the things that I saw you bring to ICC was, we'll talk about this in a bit, but the client mindset, this just unbending dedication to who is the client and what are the client's needs. Would you just say, Mark certainly thought that you had already at that time a pretty strong urge or desire to understand what were the client's real needs.
But it was Mark who was crucial in shaping my thinking on that, because he was somebody who really emphasized that, you can't have a case about a widget unless you understand how the widget is made, but you cannot have a case, you cannot properly represent the client unless you really understand the client's business and really understand the client's broader strategic objectives. And that has really shaped my work as an advocate. I mean, you can't come into a client and say, and it was always frustrating, they'd say, what's your strategy? And I was like, we haven't even talked. I don't even know what your objective is. So you could come in with a strategy to say, we could come in and get this case done as fast as possible. And the client could say, well, actually, my strategy is to bury the other side and make this case drag out as long as possible. And so you've really got to understand, but also you really need to understand the business. And that is understanding the clients. But
do you think that that's something that you also do as an arbitrator, that you really try to understand what are the businesses that are involved here?
Well, absolutely. You have to understand what the case is really about. What are people really talking about? And so hopefully it's that zeroing in on the key issues to really understand that.
And understand the big picture as well as the
right, you've got to understand the key issue, but you really got to take a step back and say, what is the fight really about?
So we go in your career, jump forward actually from the Czech Republic. You're next at DLA, you become partner there, then co-chair of the global arbitration practice, and then also a title that you also had, a position you held also at Latham & Watkins later. Were there any key learnings in your case in the Czech Republic that you think that propelled you towards those? I'm sure there must have been.
Well, absolutely. Going to the Czech Republic was transformative for my career. I went from doing a little bit of international arbitration to 100% Arbitration, it gave me the opportunity to really engage with civil law. It gave me the opportunity to not just work on the Saluka versus Czech Republic case, but other investment treaty cases, and then commercial arbitrations all across Europe. I mean, a highlight while I was there was kind of the last summer, having 3 arbitration cases in 3 cities in 3 months. So it was an intense experience, but also traveling. I remember from a client meeting in Dublin to Athens, and it was as far, as you could travel at that point in the Eurozone. But a key learning from the overall experience of being in the Czech Republic was also really recognizing that the achievement was not, let's say, being picked to go to a meeting by yourself and thinking like, oh, I'm so great because I've been asked to go do this, but actually going together as a team, because you then present so many different perspectives and can also offer a combination of expertise. And I think in large firms in particular, but so many different problems, you actually need the expertise from so many different people. And that's really what clients are looking for. And so that was a really important lesson.
Yeah, well, let's talk about teams for a second, because you go on, you build some pretty impressive teams which were still there at DLA and at Latham & Watkins. I mean, are there any key tips or lessons that you would pass on to those in the room or others who may watch the video about how to build a successful practice in international arbitration?
I would say 2 key things. The first is that you really have to look at the unique firm you are in. So the way we thought to build a practice at DLA Piper was different than at Latham & Watkins. DLA Piper had offices all over the world. And so DLA Piper had an office in Tbilisi, Georgia. And so in the very early months when I had come, I had read about a case being filed against Georgia. And I thought, well, we have an office there, so let's see if we can get that case. And they were about to hire another law firm, and we were able to then get hired. And so it was using the strength of the firm. And then when I went to Latham & Watkins, 50% of the revenue at that time, I don't know what it would be now, but at Latham, 50% of the revenue came from financial institutions. And so I thought, well, if you're going to cross-sell, I better be known as someone who can handle matters related to financial institutions. And then I proposed and then became the co-chair of the ICC Task Force on Financial Institutions and International Arbitration. And it was, and the strength of Latham was the depth of client relationships. So there was a different opportunity to cross-sell. So one is recognizing that, different strategies have to be applied in different places, but related to that is what I would say is shop your closet. You have to really see what your assets are. When you shop your closet, you open your closet and think you have nothing to wear. But if you actually take a moment to look, you might combine what you have, like a nice skirt that you haven't worn for a while, with a new belt. But you're not buying a whole new outfit.
Wait, so give me an example of shopping your closet at the firms.
In the law firm, every theme of a partner conference is unlocking the potential, leveraging the platform. The firms benefit when you see what you actually have, and the lawyers are empowered and educated to be able to cross-sell. One of the learnings at Latham was matters were more profitable when they had higher numbers of offices and higher numbers of practice groups working with those clients. And so the lesson of building the practice is first, what are the assets you actually have? What are the what lawyers have actually handled disputes that would be cross-border that they're not even seeing as an international arbitration practice, but may actually already be. You know, clients would say when you go for pitches, all of you are qualified. Why should we work with you? So it's about a relationship. Or what are you offering strategically differently than others? When we were starting out, we didn't have a long credential list at DLA Piper. If we were pitching against Freshfields, we would lose every single time because they had, of course, a much longer credential list. So we had to think, how could we be strategically different? What could we offer differently? I remember getting hired by a private equity firm for a matter when we were up against firms that had longer credential lists in the investment treaty arena, but we were offering expertise around funds. We were offering an understanding of M&A disputes and investment treaty work, you know, 3 legs of a stool, and we would get hired in that context.
That's a great metaphor, the shop your closet. Careful how you use that at home. You know, it can be misinterpreted. So along this path, before, and we'll get to the ICC in a moment, but you start getting arbitration appointments. When about did that occur, when you started acting as an arbitrator?
Much later than I think people thought. I think people thought I had experience as arbitrator when I didn't, because I think I had about 10 potential arbitrator appointments when I was at DLA Piper, but because I had conflicts for about 10 matters before I got my first appointment that I could take. And like most people who get their first appointments, it was an institutional appointment, and it was an emergency arbitration, and it was the last week of August, so a week when I would otherwise be mostly on holiday. But it was an appointment that I thought, well, I want to take it because I don't want to miss this opportunity. Again,
fire jumper.
Yeah, and also, again, as people are balancing work-life, maybe that's not the right choice for them, but it was for me.
So that's kind of sets us where you then apply for this position at this institution that we know, ICC. But we're now in the June 2020. You're co-global head at Latham. You've got a very successful practice, and you and your husband, by the way, you just finished building a home outside of New York. You're getting appointments as an arbitrator. I mean, it's a pretty good gig you've got there, Claudia, at this stage, right? And then Alexei Moore announces he's going to step down, and you decide to throw your hat in the ring. And you send a 9-page letter setting out your skills, experience, and your vision to lead the ICC Court into the next century. So I have a 2-part question at this point. So first is, what motivated you to apply for this radical change, a potentially radical change of your life? And second, in applying, did you not hesitate at least a bit at the fact that no woman or American had held that position in 100 years since the organization's establishment?
So I really was ready for an executive role or was interested in some leadership position. I was the global co-chair of the practice, led teams, but I really liked shaping strategy, not just for specific cases, but for the practice group and getting to know client businesses and thinking more about business issues. So I enjoyed that aspect. And I had a career-long connection with ICC. I even was the chair of the Young Arbitrator Forum in its very early stages when it was only in the United States, and kind of had really been connected only with ICC, and at that point had served on the ICC Court as the US court member and also as a vice president. So it was definitely a leap to apply. I never set out to make history as the first woman. or first American, and certainly Alexi Moore deserves so much credit for laying the groundwork and for the audacity of the numerous steps he took to promote diversity in international arbitration, most significantly by achieving gender parity on the ICC Court at that point.
But still, I don't think that answers my question, counsel. I mean, it's a radical change. Mark Nadeau, when I spoke with him, he has a theory that I think is probably right, is that you saw this as an opportunity. You are here's the skeleton from Claudia's closet, is that she is fundamentally a really good person who wants to see positive change in the world, and you saw this as an opportunity to bring about real positive change. Isn't that true?
So one of the ways that my husband and I have made sure we have shaped our lives was that I never wanted to have golden handcuffs. I never wanted to have a situation where I had to continue a particular job for the financial aspect. So of course, if I had stayed as a partner at Latham, could have continued having amazing cases, and financially things would be in a different context. But that was not what I was driven by. The opportunity to shape an institution and shape a field and have a new set of challenges was really what was interesting to me.
And Mark says something else that I agree with. And he says the reason that you were undaunted in applying is that you knew that you were the right person for the job.
You have to have a level of confidence if you apply for something, and you have to really believe it. And then if you don't get something, then maybe if you are being blasé, like, well, I didn't really want it, you have to want it if you're going to take a big leap. Because if you don't really want something, people can see right through that. And you have to want something because your brain has to be switched on to be thinking about it in a very intense way. So yes, of course, I wanted it because, and hopefully those are good attributes, and people will, also younger lawyers who are listening, will think having ambition is a good thing.
So how are you liking the job?
I love this role, and I hope people can see that. It's a job of a lifetime. It's an incredible opportunity to shape an institution, shape a field, learn so much about the way business works, the way people are thinking all over the world. It is super intense and exhausting at times, but it is really a unique and wonderful experience.
Yeah, one of your expressions you use, which is I really like this, is that you talk about you feel like you're planting trees. Can you explain what you mean by you're planting trees in this position?
Yeah, yesterday I think someone was being described as, gardening, and it's often you plant seeds, and then you see the outcome. But if you are a director of an arboretum, you will never see the benefit of the work you're doing in your lifetime when the growth of trees is decades, if not centuries. And that is absolutely true in the context of the ICC Court. Just to put some numbers on this concept, only 20% of our cases arose from contracts that were signed in the last 2 years. And 50% of the cases arose from contracts 5 and 10 years ago. And so it is not a platitude to say that every single thing I'm doing, every single thing the Secretariat is doing, is for our successors and our successors' successors. The statistics of 2023 and 2024 were baked. you know, they are the outcome of parties entering into contracts, and the work that Alexi and John and Robert Briner and Pierre Trissier all did talking to companies, and the Secretariat talking to companies, and people feeling confident that they want to use ICC arbitration. And that's, you know, really consistent with the way business leaders talk. If they'll say, you know, if anyone in the C-suite is talking about the results for the next quarter, they're not doing their job, because those statistics, that outcome is baked already. We've got to be thinking much further ahead.
So let's take what, as you approach, let's talk about transformation, you know, what you've done with the ICC. I mean, you know, looking back, this is recorded for posterity, what would you hope would be looked upon as your greatest accomplishment so far while you've been at the ICC?
Well, I will definitely leave that to others, but my number one focus is to make sure that everyone sees and feels, and everything we do is around having a client mindset, that we are focused on the needs of the parties in the arbitration, that there are so many stakeholders in an arbitration, the arbitrators, of course, third-party funders, outside counsel, experts, but at the end of the day, the arbitration is the parties' arbitration, and it is the parties who are deciding whether to use arbitration or litigation, and if they're choosing arbitration, whether they're going to use ICC arbitration or some other alternative.
And how are you bringing that about?
Well, it's really taking my experience as outside counsel, where we had to meet and exceed client expectations every day in order to win work and keep work, that I hope to be bringing that perspective in the way that the Secretariat and our practices and policies are around being responsive, accessible, and that if there is a key differentiator between ICC arbitration and any other institution, it boils down to service. It boils down to the way we communicate and are available and accessible, and what we do. And that is as simple as, you know, getting feedback from in-house counsel to say one of the most frustrating things they have is getting an email with an award attached on a Friday, or the day before they're going on holiday, or the day they need to do public reporting. And one of the in-house counsel saying to me, couldn't you just give us a little notice when an award is to be issued? It was like, well, yes, we can. And so now it's our practice at the Secretariat to just ask the parties, do you wish to have 48-hour notice or some other notice before an award is issued? And that, to me, is taking my experience as outside counsel, where if you know you have a brief due on a Monday, you don't submit your draft on a Friday. You ask the client, when do you need to have the draft in order for you to have enough time to review it and provide meaningful feedback? And so it's the same sort of mindset.
Let's just shift now. For enough of this ICC stuff. Let's talk about Claudia as counsel and arbitrator. Favorite case or cases?
Definitely one of my favorite moments in my entire career was getting a text message from the Attorney General of Thailand asking if I would negotiate on their behalf. And I just thought, well, how do you use honorifics in a text? Are you supposed to do that, or can you write LOL, or, you know? So first, strategic thinking about the use of technology. We did get to represent the country of Georgia in 3 major cases. I had the opportunity to interview former President Mcilwrath as a potential witness in a case. And then when we went back to meet him, he was not in the same mental state and condition as he had been when we first met him, and we needed to witdraw that witness statement.
Claudia, and I'm going to ask you a question in your capacity, not as ICC, but as an arbitrator, on a topic that is near and dear to every in-house counsel, time and costs. What can arbitrators do to better control time and costs consistent with party expectations for how arbitration should be conducted?
Yeah. So I have written on this topic. I heard someone one of the experts today referring to ships passing in the night, and I have zeroed in on that too. My number one mantra for efficiency in an arbitration, aside from adopting expedited procedures, is focusing on the issues to be decided, not just at the beginning of the case when you may not have enough information to articulate what the issue is, or you're articulating it at a super high level, like is there a breach of contract or is there a breach of clause 23, which is not very specific. But once you've had a further round of submissions, having a case management conference to articulate the issues to be decided.
A CMC2, not a
CMC2.
Yeah.
And having a revisit those issues to be decided before you go into a hearing. And then at the end of the hearing, and it is my practice as arbitrator to have a couple of hours at the end of the hearing where we actually go through the issues to be decided, see if they need to be reframed, and that then the parties, if they are doing post-hearing briefs, are zeroing in on those issues, and that when the tribunal goes into deliberations, it really is clear what we have to decide. It also then focuses everyone's mind, is this color or is this really about what we have to decide?
And you do this, you try to do this in the where you're acting as an arbitrator to include sort of a midstream conference or a CMC2, where you'll do this refocusing of the issues.
Yes.
Great. Over the course of your career, what would you say is the biggest change that you've observed in the practice of international arbitration?
Diversity, broadly defined, fortunately. So we have seen amazing developments in terms of the number of women in leadership roles as counsel, in their practice groups, as arbitrators, a big transformation in that respect. But also when we talk about diversity, it's so much more than gender issues, that we have parties at ICC arbitration from 150 different countries, but we have arbitrators in ICC arbitration from 100 different countries. And so that is a big transformation. There is so much more we need to be doing in the context, in particular, race and ethnic diversity, that when we talk about geographic diversity is very different than race and ethnic diversity, because we have to be focusing on race and ethnic minorities in particular countries all over the world. And also, of course, in gender diversity, when arbitral institutions make the appointments, there is much more, many more women appointed, and when parties and the co-arbitrators make the nomination, the numbers are still dire, and so if we're going to see big transformation in this respect, it's going to take all of us.
Great. If I have just one more question, I think we'll kind of conclude here, but I think people would be interested in your perspective on the future of international arbitration, but looking at sort of the macroeconomic trends, because in Claudia's position, Claudia also sits and participates in the global ICC, which looks at global trade. This shift that we've seen recently in recent years from multilateralism towards regionalism, and a number of other changes. I mean, if you were, from your perch, where do you see the trends and how they will impact international arbitration in the coming years?
Yeah. So I like to follow the money, and what I mean by that is I can tell you the statistics of what percentage of our cases involve life sciences or what percentage involve energy. And all that does is reflect the number of contracts that were entered into, the deals that were entered into in the past. I need to know, we all at ICC we all need to understand what kind of transactions are happening now, because that's going to tell us what kind of disputes are going to happen in the future. And so, in order to position ourselves strategically. So I am very interested in the fact that the trade with Mexico, the United States and Mexico is now higher than US and China. What does that tell us? It tells us that there's going to be more US-China disputes. If we see, when I talk to business leaders in Taipei, they told me that they are seeing many more joint ventures, and there's so much more investment happening in South Asia. But they're also, because of localization, they're entering into joint ventures with companies in the United States and in other places because the countries want those products manufactured in locally, but not necessarily, by companies from those countries that might not have the capability. But if you have companies entering into contracts very, very quickly with new parties that they've never entered into contracts with before, there's not a history of trust. And so that is a recipe for potential disputes. And so that tells us we need to be connecting with industries like that. And so I think not just ICC, but lawyers need to be understanding this issue in order these issues to position ourselves for the future. And that's really why we have interjected these conversations. I've had fireside chats with business leaders all over the world, and we've brought in the conversations around trends and business strategies into all of our conferences, not just reflecting statistics, but really what do business leaders see is on the horizon.
That's great. I sort of feel like we're just getting started here, but recognizing that we do have a lunch to conclude, thank you very much, Claudia.
Great, thank you.
Good hand for Claudia.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you. All right.
And thank you, everybody at the ITA, for making this happen. This was terrific. Thank you.
Okay, good, thank you.